please stop by. We'd love to see you there. Next up, we have a brand new NHA award opportunity to put on your radar. NHA has launched the Achievements in Waterpower Award, and this celebrates impactful achievements across the U.S. water power industry, recognizing projects, programs that advance innovation, enhance environmental and recreation outcomes, and strengthen the public understanding of water power. Recipients will be recognized live at Clean Currents, and the deadline to apply for the award is this Friday, June 19th. If you do not have a project in mind this year, definitely keep this one on your radar for next year. And I think Kelly just dropped that in the chat, so you can click on that and learn a little bit more about the award. And next up on our list of announcements here, we have the Flow July meeting. That will be held on July 15th. And it's called How Hydropower Makes Money 101 from Markets to Megawatts. The session is going to break down how hydropower operators generate revenue, from navigating electricity markets to understanding how megawatts translate to dollars. With summer bringing peak electricity demand and some of the highest energy prices of the year, the timing could not be better to dig into the economics behind our industry. So whether you're new to the water power industry or more experienced, it's great foundational knowledge to better understand the business side of what we do. And lastly, just a quick reminder on some training and an opportunity to give some input. Flow participants are eligible for a 50% discount on the Hydropower Systems Principles training offered through NHA's Hydro Academy. So if you're interested in accelerating your technical knowledge, this is a great way to do it. And feel free to reach out to Kelly Rogers for details. Also, we have an open form to submit ideas for future Flow meeting topics. If you've been wanting to hear from experts on a specific topic, please share it. And Kelly is dropping the link in the chat right now for you to fill in any new ideas for meetings. But for today's meeting, let's jump right into our discussion. Hydropower Tax Credits 101, from Capitol Hill to the Powerhouse. So this is a timely topic, given how much attention clean energy incentives are getting right now and how important they are for the future of hydropower. Our goal is to connect the dots between how tax credits come together at the federal level and what they actually look like in practice for hydropower operators. So first off, we have our speaker, Shannon Benyaga, and she is going to bring some expertise on energy policy, market strategy, and she has been closely involved in the development and implementation of clean energy tax credits. Shannon is the Senior Managing Director and U.S. Power and Utility Lead at FTI Consulting. During her time, she's going to walk us through how the tax credits came together, what they're designed to do, and how hydropower fits into the broader clean energy policy landscape. Shannon, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Haley, and thank you all for inviting me to be here today. You know, when I got the ask from Kelly and Kathy, I was really excited to talk about this. And then when it came time to trying to bring some notes together, just so I you know, would stay somewhat in a line for you all, I quickly realized it's been 5 years since we ran the direct pay campaign, and a lot has happened, obviously, in 5 years. But you know, before I get to that, I was asked very nicely by Kelly and Kathy to talk a little bit about me, my career voyage, and some other things I've probably forgotten. So you know, you two, please keep me in line here. So Shannon Benyaga, I'm in the Washington office of FTI Consulting. I came to Washington, as we were talking about, right as folks were coming on, actually right after 9/11. Odd time to come to the city, but I began my career over at the Department of Energy, working on really interesting issues around nuclear waste. Specifically, Yucca Mountain was kind of my baby. My office housed the environmental impact statement, which was nearly as tall as I was, in several piles, and really, you know, that kind of sucked me into wanting to continue my public servant life in Washington. And so after my turn at DOE was done, I went over to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, their Office of Enforcement, where I became an enforcement attorney. And really for a number of years had the opportunity to get involved in some of, frankly, the nation's most interesting cases, which really ranged from, my very first investigation was the blackout of 2003. I came into my job not knowing much about the power grid, other than I liked, the air conditioning and the lights to go on and that sort of thing. And then, day 3, I'm flying to Ohio to do depositions on why SCADA didn't pick up and how a squirrel could basically tank a large portion of our nation's power grid. But through that time, really high profile cases like that, got to do a lot of work on market manipulation cases. But also, hydro was in my portfolio as well, and certainly the commission's jurisdiction. Got to go down to some really, small run-of-river kind of hydro projects, which were great. I grew up around Fontana Dam with TVA, and so my experience with hydro has always been great, absent my father trying to get us into the intake valves a couple times. But really, it was a wonderful experience, and a soon to be political one, as I got myself into some investigations that really captured the unwanted attention of Capitol Hill and other folks. So I kind of departed stage left after, got a taste of that and went to litigate for a number of years at a firm that became Hush Blackwell. Really, my principal bread and butter was doing a lot of oil and gas litigation. I did a lot of oil tax litigation, which as the daughter of a CPA, I tried to run away from tax issues as much as I possibly could in my life. And then ended up doing a lot of electric transmission work at the firm when former FERC chairman Jim Hecker joined us. From there, kind of saw the writing on the wall in terms of, our first kind of recession, if you will, back in the early 2000s. And, also was getting a little maybe excited and over advocacy driven on some of my cases where I really thought, I could probably easily be doing the same type of work I was doing at the firm for the rest of my career. But I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that. And so went over and kind of had an epiphany and said, like, could we solve some of these litigation issues and being in trial for years and years if we got the policy right? I was very naive at the time to think that, but that is exactly what I did. So I spent basically the next decade of my career over on the utility side, first with PSEG, a New Jersey-based utility company, and then with TECO Energy and Emera. So ended up really through those years, through that decade of my life, working on everything from national security issues, natural disaster issues. I had territory that went from Nova Scotia to New Mexico to the Caribbean. Did a lot of environment, tax, trade, you name it, NAFTA renegotiation. So I really had an opportunity to really, get involved on a lot of areas, but my fan favorite was really stakeholder engagement, being able to try and find that meaty middle of these policy disputes, and especially in Washington, which that middle keeps shrinking, unfortunately, and really wanted to build out a platform where I could support the power sector as it's going through a number of these regulatory opportunities and challenges, but also legal and crisis work. And so that landed me at FTI, where I've been for the last 6.5 years. And, for those of you not familiar with FTI, I won't give the whole kitchen spiel, but we're a global advisory firm, 8,000 strong across the world, and do everything from strategic communications, where I sit, to economic consulting, forensic litigation, technology, and corporate finance. I do a lot of, and why I came again, to really run kind of policy campaigns, really big in the Biden years. You could do that without having a lot of reputational damage. I will say in Trump 2.0, it's been a little challenging on the national level. A lot of my policy campaigns now are kind of state-based and regional-based. But I do a lot on due diligence work, stakeholder engagement, especially if you're trying to build any kind of energy infrastructure project. Yes, I'm dabbling in data centers. but I do a lot of crisis work as well. So that is kind of operational crisis, when things that aren't supposed to explode, catch fire, cybersecurity issues, as well as political crisis and those types of moments. Kelly, Kathy, anything else about my background I should say before I jump into this?
I don't know. Did you ever win anything at the Supreme Court?
On
Were you
occasion.
possibly name checked in a whole opinion?
On occasion. It was fun going from, being a active litigating lawyer to being an active witness, cited in some cases. So thank you for that, that kick down memory lane. So maybe I'll just jump into the direct pay campaign real quick. And again, I apologize. It's been 5 years since we ran this campaign, and everyone that is on Teams now knows that Teams eats everything. It archives everything. So I'm clumsily going to go through a bit of a PDF deck, if that's okay. So while I get that up, assuming I can get that up again.
While you're pulling that up, I
Yeah.
think one of the things that might be interesting for this crew to hear as they're starting in their career and we're shaping young minds and all is, yeah, okay, you've got the problem statement here, but I think maybe talking about like what it was like before the IRA and direct pay, like who had access to tax credits and who didn't, and why was that terrible public policy?
Absolutely. Well, you got right into my statement here. So we all know energy tax credits existed well before the IRA. The big problem was that unless you had taxes to offset, you didn't get to claim those tax credits. So even though Congress essentially, wanted to express a benefit for you engaging in these fuels and technologies and what have you, it was really only and I don't mean this derogatory at all, but the for-profit entities that could actually seize upon this sort of thing. So Kathy led me right into kind of the slide one here. So this is actually the deck that we use to kind of put together the thoughts around this campaign. So at the beginning of the Biden administration, a company called Apex Clean Energy came to us with a pretty clear vision. Again, clean energy tax credits had historically been a primary mechanism from which the federal government really supported the deployment of, I'll say all energy, but specifically clean energy as we talk about it here. Spoiler alert, that tax policy is also how we actually do national energy policy in this country. We don't really have a great history of doing national energy policy other than through taxes, but I digress. So clean energy developers typically didn't have sufficient tax liability to use the tax credits themselves, hindering the deployment of next-gen technologies. So for decades, renewable energy developers basically relied on a complex financing structure where they partnered with banks and corporations that had sufficient tax liability and monetized those credits. That workaround was for the developers to go to the tax equity markets where they basically traded these tax credits for a lesser amount of cash up front. The system was inefficient, expensive, created barriers to entry, particularly for smaller developers, nonprofits, munis, co-ops, and really very, very nascent emergent technologies. So as we think back, developers on average were losing about 10, 20, 30% of the value of that credit just to get cash for it. There was a bigger problem too that we learned, which was the tax equity market, although willing to do this, obviously they got a good deal of this, right? They couldn't absorb the massive influx of projects coming and really had to turn away good shovel-ready projects. And I know, hydro sector knows that pain well. Many of your companies, especially those that developed smaller run-of-the-river projects, or if you were modernizing existing facilities or operating as a muni, really struggled with that tax equity financing or were shut out completely. That's we thought that was pretty unfair. Apex Clean Energy thought that was pretty unfair. And so, what we really found that we needed, and I'll kind of skip through the challenges and opportunities because I think most people knew the political wins at that point. I do actually want to just focus on this quote from Senator Joe Manchin. And it was one of my favorite quotes to just use the whole time because it really set the tone for what we walked into, right? So, he basically was like, look, it pointed at solar and wind specifically, said, you guys have had tax credit support for years. My mama carried me for 9 months. How long do you expect, the federal government and taxpayers to carry you all? And that, as you probably all remember or might know, he was the guiding force behind the IRA and really the person that we needed to win over amongst, the rest of everyone. So what we really created was, an integrated coalition-based advocacy campaign that really strove for 100% direct pay to accelerate infrastructure investment and economic recovery while accomplishing the nation and the president at the time's clean energy goals. We had one chance to get this right, right? So we had an interesting spot where you had the trifecta of kind of Democratic leadership. I will say, it was really important for us it was vital for me as someone who kind of ran the campaign to really not only have messaging and a campaign that resonated with Democrats, but one that also wouldn't annoy Republicans. And even though we knew this was going to be a partisan fight, we knew, we weren't going to get Republican support necessarily on the overarching Inflation Reduction Act, we had to have a campaign that actually didn't annoy them. And you'll probably guess why, but I'll remind you all a little later. I just want to go through just some of the mechanics of the campaign real quick, and I'm not going to do this justice at all, but we really wanted to provide air cover. We wanted to have a broad coalition of folks. And so what we ended up developing is, Apex basically front loaded the entire thing. We had a lot of folks join officially the coalition from utilities and nonprofits and trade organizations, investment folks. And then we had folks that joined the organization but didn't want their logos on for political reasons and other things that they were trying to get out of the Inflation Reduction Act or had just gone through with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, right before this thing rolled out. Another thing we wanted to make sure that we did was really just surround sound everyone all the time. And to get that right, we needed the right messaging to start off with. And one of the reasons that I landed at FTI was, FTI started off as a forensic firm. Everything we do is entrenched in data, whether that's economic analysis, whether that's rolling out with polling and surveys so that we understand how, policymakers or policy influencers or regular elected, regular Joes on the block will look at a message or look at a campaign and say, okay, I'm inclined to agree with that, or absolutely not. And what we found in that was, one, words matter, which we always know, but there were key words that we used, unleash for one, when paired with the rest of our message, was something that both Republicans and Democrats kind of got. It didn't alienate anyone. They kind of understood the motivation for this. And it's something today that I'm really proud of. You can see kind of our core messaging today from that campaign being used by Republicans and Democrats in other energy campaigns, which to me speaks to the life of it. This is just to give you an idea of kind of some of the things that we did on a digital basis all the time, just to make, and I'm sorry that the campaign's website is down, and you can't go back and look at it right now. Problem with having a successful campaign is folks don't want to pay to keep it up after it's done. But the other thing we really did is make sure that we were being very laser specific in who we were targeting here, right? This was absolutely going to be a policy play. We wanted to make sure that we were, targeting and educating folks that would weigh into policymakers across the spectrum. So it was a pretty giant leap. The other thing, we wanted to make sure media got this, that they had the opportunities to understand what was going on, but also being able to utilize stories that were being written. I think, again, this was kind of, coming into the COVID era. I did so many podcasts. I never want to hear my voice again. I really don't. But we really thought about media in a broad swath for this campaign, and then really looked at the, like I said, the influencers. Um, all of that to say, the Partnership for Clean Energy was then born. And really, again, this wasn't about making the system easier. It was about really unlocking the full potential of the IRAs, or what became the IRA's clean energy investments. That broad coalition, that economic analysis that demonstrated the benefits that we used, our direct engagement with policymakers really, I think resonated with people on how this financial mechanism could accelerate project deployment, reduce financing costs, expand access for capital to underserved developers. You're also minimizing taxpayer return, or maximizing taxpayer return on investment. One of the most heartfelt things that I learned through this process of running this campaign was reaching out to all of the folks that were doing kind of community solar projects in Baltimore, and just hearing the stories of how this type of mechanism could really change lives, and really change their ability to, do what they needed to do to bring cleaner energy, cleaner water, cleaner air into their communities. But we couldn't have done that without, really addressing some big issues up front. Does anyone remember the American Recovery Act? Anyone? Okay. Section in there called 1603. Rather large
I got
fiasco.
you, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. Rather large fiasco that came out of that, called Solyndra. And this was one of the biggest hurdles that we had with the direct pay campaign, is that everyone was like, isn't this just going to set up a bunch of Solyndras, right? And so, one, we had to explain the difference between the RS 1603 grant program, its deficiencies, mainly that there was no due diligence done, and what we were proposing, right? Which wasn't a grant, but it was just literally being able to monetize the tax credits that Congress had already set aside, right? That it was just a financial open the door, and eliminate some of these middlemen. So we had to kind of go through that educational process with both Republicans and Democrats. The other, big hurdle from my memory was this was going to cost a lot, right? Not only did you have the tax credits, you had the IRA that was growing day by day in terms of what it was going to cover and all of the funding that was going to be necessary. When this was finally scored in the end, and I'm jumping to the very end of this, it was about 36 billion from the Joint Committee on Taxation. And that was basically for a 10-year run from 2022 to 2031. So not a small amount to beef with, but one of the things that we used was basically comparing that cost to the overall cost of everything else, right? And in that respect, it was pennies basically. What we ended up achieving, and I'll just kind of flip through the slides, and this is kind of the opening deck that we used to kind of garner support. Blood, sweat, tears, many tears later. I think the third time Senator Manchin pulled his support from the Inflation Reduction Act, I kind of sat on the floor of the train station in New York and was like, do I bother coming back to Washington? And what are we going to do here? But lo and behold, we ran this campaign full out. We got Democrats on our side. We had like 180 briefings that we did. And in the end, the bill passed 51-50, if you all remember. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans on the Senate side, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. On the House side, it was 220 to 207, I think. And then the IRA was eventually signed in August 2022. One of the great things that happened, I'm just seeing if there's anything else here that we want to kind of click through now. I can stop sharing. One of the great things that really kind of came out of this was, again, focusing on you guys, this allowed eligible entities, including Alaska Native corporations, Tennessee Valley Authority, Indian tribal governments, any kind of tax exempt organization, as long as you met the standards set forth in the clean energy tax credit, whether you're doing hydrogen or hydro or what have you, to elect to get direct payment for that full value of the applicable tax credits. We did not succeed in getting the full campaign that we were hoping for. We didn't get 100% direct pay for all eligible entities, but what we got was meaningful change. I will always be forever proud of this campaign. And as of last month, direct pay is still operational and being utilized across the clean energy sector. The IRS did its job and issued guidance, and it took a while. But one of the things, I think to focus on is that I paid a lot of attention and spoke a lot about how we kind of went into the campaign development, how we did the data to get the wording right and to get the messaging right and, test it. That has led to the durability of today, right? Obviously, we've had a couple of years here where a lot of clean energy and climate programs have been kind of clawed back. I'm knocking on wood because it can always happen, but as of right now, direct pay is still on and strong. It still faces ongoing scrutiny. There are a lot of members of Congress that have proposed eliminating these provisions as part of additional swaths of the IRA that they want to cut back. But I will say, this to me, even working with groups that couldn't necessarily put their name to our coalition, we worked alongside them. We gathered intel, we shared intel, and that to me is exactly how any kind of policy campaign should be run. I think this was a game changer for the clean energy industry. I think this was a win for the hydropower industry. I hope that you guys are all using it. I don't have all of the great facts about how much has been utilized today at this point, but I will say, I was really afraid that the banks were going to come after us running a campaign, and kind of calling them middlemen and calling them out for not being able to fund all of these things. But I remember the first, call I got, I think it was from Citibank, and they're like, "We agree with you guys. How can we help?" And that to me, said that we were rolling in the right direction. So I think I've exhausted my 30 minutes. I will close with, on any kind of policy campaigns like this, please, and especially on direct pay, right? To the extent you guys are using it, seeing rewards from it, educate your members, your delegation on how it's worked, how it could be improved, the benefits that it restores. Provide feedback to Treasury on anything that they do on implementation changes. And, to the extent that there's a possibility to do coalitions to defend direct pay or any of these other policy initiatives that you all deal with on a regular basis, we're happy to help support you guys. So, Kelly, Kathy, hopefully that was a quick, non-boring run through.
Not boring at all, Shannon. I think that was an excellent overview. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I think if I could just underline one thing, sorry, besides the fact that I'm the biggest Shannon fan in all of DC. I think one thing that this should stand out for this group, besides use direct pay and tell people about it. And to your question, Courtney, in the chat, Matt's about to give you a real world example. That's why we've had him here today. But I think setting up kind of like, I think this is a great example of a bunch of policy practitioners and companies saw a real problem in the market, in the industry, and solved it. I mean, they paid Shannon to solve it, but you know what I mean? Like that at that point, tax credits were frankly the only energy policy we really had, and were not available to organizations like TVA, like, the public utility districts and stuff on the, half of hydropower is owned publicly. And just solved it. I think that's one thing that I wish more people knew early in their career, was that public policy is hard to change, but it's changeable. If you see a problem, like, come to Kelly, come to us, come to talk. We can't solve everything, but when you can throw down with the resources of someone like Shannon, sometimes you can get really good public policy out of it. And people like Matt will help you defend it.
Thank you, Kathy.
Appreciate that, and acknowledging Courtney's question in the chat here. We're actually going to shift our conversation from policy to practice. So we are excited to have Matthew Brooks a strategic consultant for hydropower generation at the Tennessee Valley Authority, joining to share us an operator perspective. Matthew is going to walk us through how TVA is looking at these tax credits in a real world context and what implementation looks like and some key considerations from a utility perspective. Matthew, over to you.
I think you misspoke. I'm going to attempt to walk us through how we did this very clumsily. No, thanks for having me. Yeah, Matthew Brooks here from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I grew up here. Just a few minutes kind of background on me. Hired into TVA here in 2010. Did almost 8 years in the field as a mechanical engineer. So that's my trade. Worked on all of our hydro units across the valley. So lots of windshield time, lots of outages, lots of project work. So I got that technical background. I did a few years kind of in the operations side of hydro. So how we dispatch our units in our control center. Did a few years in our financial section of TVA, specifically in the benchmarking. So I may have touched base with a few of you out there in the benchmarking world. If you're a part of the EUCG or Electric Utility Cost Group, I may have seen you there. And then came back over here to this strategic consultant role in 2023. And in this role, I've been here for 3 years now. Work with the leaders and the plant managers and the techs just on fleet level things. And so when this Inflation Reduction Act came out and we found out we were eligible for tax credits, that was my immediate go-to from my boss and say, you're going to learn about tax credits. So I have a new appreciation for accountants, let's just say that, as an engineer, because it is I don't mind doing my own taxes, but doing them for work is something totally different. So let's see here. I'll share. I've got a few slides to run through, but nothing crazy. So just to give you guys some background, I wanted to give you guys a snapshot of progress of where we're at. So in calendar year 2023, TVA did our first tax filing, and that was TVA's first ever tax submission into the IRS. So we are a tax exempt entity. We're a not-for-profit organization, even though we're federally owned. And so this is kind of a first time for us. But we did our first one. I'll kind of go into the projects here on the next slide of what exactly we were filing credits for. But this first filing was for 2 capital projects. Roughly $10 million each is a good round number. So as you'll see through these slides. But the first one there, calendar year 2023, we filed in November of 2024. So we had 2 units returned to service from capital projects in calendar year 2023 for $22.8 million. And then the IRS received our tax filing, and we waited all the way till November 2025 and actually got more. We got some interest in there. So you'll see that number jump up by almost, a little over 4 million there, or almost 4 million just in interest credits. Now, I want to say this specifically about that first filing. We did have some EV charging stations also we got some credit for, and some energy efficiency things in there. So it's not all hydro, but I'd say like 99% of that total is hydro. And going to the next year, last November, we swapped to a fiscal year filing. So fiscal year 24, we had 3 capital projects. So the IRS accepted that filing as well, and we're just awaiting payment. So we're just any day now, probably get a check in the mail. If you guys caught the lunch and learn we did a few weeks back, we actually got a physical check from the IRS for that first filing for 26 million, which is just nerve-wracking to have a check of that magnitude. And it wasn't like a big, publisher's clearinghouse, you're holding it up. It's tiny. So whoever had to endorse that thing and walk it to the bank was probably sweating bullets. And then we're currently working on our FY25 filing. So that's going to be a single capital project there for 13.7. So we're pursuing submitting that filing in August of this year. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are. Just the general process of how we followed this. So first of all, we had a financial services team and our Office of General Counsel kind of scour all the tax language and figure out what we need to do, what information we need to gather. For us, we started with that top bullet there. You see the investment tax credit versus production tax credit analysis. So we looked at the hydro capital projects that we were eligible for, and we're really trying to figure out which one is more beneficial for us, both time wise, how much effort we're going to put in versus how much credit we're going to get back. So for us, the ITC, the investment tax credit, weighed out better because hydro is not a base load unit for our utility. The production, you could show some. We did show incremental increase in production, but there's that 10-year period of documentation after you file, which is just a lot of effort. So we opted for the ITC, and so we were able to file for those two projects on that first year. We got about 30% back of our capital projects. So, around numbers, if we spend $30 million rehabilitating a hydro unit, we would get 30% of that back, or $9 million back. So that's a good general number that we use around here. Not all costs associated with the capital project are eligible. So it takes a lot of data analysis and cost reporting to go through that. But so once we determined the ITC was for us, the next step was to pre-file. So we sent in pre-file registration data with the IRS. That includes just some basics about the site, where it is, who owns it, what project we're submitting eligibility for, things like that. Once that was accepted, then we began the next two really kind of in tandem. So the project information documentation and the project cost data go hand in hand. But that's really the biggest lift of this filing process. And a lot of that is determining from the tax language, and we had help from our tax consultant to gather every single thing we need to include with the tax filing itself. So it's going to be things like detailed project data, specific equipment that were replaced. We had to prove that we increased our generation from those projects. So I think a lot of the IRA, which you just heard, was to drive increase in clean energy. So we could prove that we increased hydro energy onto our grid using historical data and comparing, the old equipment versus the new. So when we replaced a turbine, we could show, the 1942 Francis turbine that was there was less efficient. We put in a brand new one as of 2023, and we got X amount of percentage of efficiency gain, which resulted in, X amount of megawatt hours increased over the life of the unit. So that was a big deal. That required a FERC certification. So we had lots of calls with FERC, which we're not FERC regulated. That was a new territory for us too. Probably not the case for most of you guys out there, but just figuring out how to do that and go about the commission meeting process, the commission order process, and figure that out. And then our tax consultant helped us dive into the project cost data, and that was a big lift, specifically for the domestic content, and determine what costs are eligible for the tax credits in general. Now, those past filings, we were early on in there. We were exempt from prevailing wage and some domestic content. Where our current filing and our future filings, we're going to really do some homework on that stuff, because there's some significant adders and multipliers if you can prove prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements and the domestic content adder. So, and just this may be new to you and your utility, wherever you're working or your company, but just some takeaways. The key for us was proof of that incremental generation. That was a must-have. Without that, we could not. We determined we were not eligible for any tax credits of our investments. Establishing a beginning of construction date. The projects that we were looking at, they were unit outages, but the project itself is a multi-year, multi-phase project. So we had costs going back, a few years before you actually took the unit down and did the work. So if you can establish a beginning of construction date of this physical, significant nature, physical work of significant nature, or when you cross the 5% threshold of your total project cost, that would be your beginning of construction date. And then I said, moving forward, looking at prevailing wage and documentation is going to be big for us. Meeting the Davis-Bacon wage requirements, and then any apprentices you're using on site, there's minimum thresholds for those. And then tax filing extensions. So we have applied for extensions on all of our filings. It gives us an extra few months to get our paperwork in order, everything we need. It kind of takes the time pressure off of gathering everything you need for your filing. The FERC certification, these are past, for those past projects. That was a lengthy process for us, just because it was new. I don't think as of 2025 and beyond, somebody out there could correct me, but I don't think you're required to have a FERC certification any longer. One of that second bullet under lessons learned for wage documentation. So the prevailing wage requirements moving forward, one thing you will need to watch out for is documentation of that with not only your employees at your company, but any contractors you bring in and subcontractors. So we had to really work with our supply chain and work with the contracts themselves to make sure that's in the terms and conditions that they provide wage documentation for these projects. Because sometimes that can be a little testy when people are figuring out how much they make and sharing that information. And then lastly, our tax consultant, which we shared on previous calls, was extremely beneficial in helping us navigate this process. I don't think we would have been successful without them, but we're happy to recommend and share their information if you need to. But overall, I'll stop sharing. That was a 10-minute whirlwind of our experience, and I think we're gonna keep on going with the hydro, as well as we have some nuclear life extension process projects in-house that we're going after. I think they're pursuing the production tax credits on, so more to come on those, but I think that'll wrap up for me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Yeah.
I think we're going to open up for some Q&A. So if you've got any questions, anyone on the call, you can either drop it in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and unmute yourself and come on the camera if you'd like. But we do have a question from Courtney in the chat here, following Matthew's presentation. So what is the paperwork burden for these IRA tax credits? And what percentage of clean energy projects are pursuing this? That might not be a stat that on the call, but maybe interesting, to know from TVA's perspective anyhow, unless Shannon has more an idea around that.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately. And part of it is that you've got so many entities, case example, that are filing for the first time, that there's no kind of way to detect that, unless they make a nice little hoorah about it. But I do believe at some point, and I didn't see it in the Republican legislation that kind of clawed back through OBBA, some of the IRA provisions. I didn't see anything in there that gave us that kind of data at that point. It was also still a little too early when that whole process started, because Treasury had a lot to do, and I will say they did it as fast as that I think they humanly could. But it took a while to get a lot of the guidance around these provisions out.
Yeah, Courtney, I'll weigh in on your question here on paperwork. It's pretty significant. I think the filing itself is decently short, but the backup and supporting documentation is pretty lengthy. So, we included, project drawings. So they wanted proof that we owned these sites. So you have to provide some deeds or proof of purchase of these sites, of our dams. I think we've kind of joked on previous calls that we had to prove that we built these dams. We're even though TVA is a pretty big company, you still have to show the IRS that you did it. And then anything, design wise that we touched, we provided a drawing for. So turbine replacement, generator rewind, whatever you're doing for your project. Typically we prove that too. And then as far as percentage of clean energy, I mean, for us, we have a queue of capital projects. So we're doing unit rehabilitations all the time. We were doing them since the late 90s. It's really, we just became eligible for these, so we were able to take credit for them. So I think we're just now starting, like I said, to look at nuclear, but that's considered, I guess, a clean energy for no carbon emissions. So I know we're looking at that, but hydro's basically that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you both. I guess a follow-up then, do you know, does the construction have to happen after the IRA, or can you do previous projects?
So each provision for whatever technology you're claiming for lays out a specific timetable. A lot of that, frankly, is again, because of the OBBA, a lot of that is coming to a point on July 4th this year. So I would encourage you, and I'm happy to show you different provisions too, but I would encourage you to work with your broader tax team maybe on what is eligible, and you like Matthew said, there's a lot of demonstration points to meet the threshold here in terms of when do you start construction, are you substantially through construction, what does that mean, is it physical, breaking ground, is it financial mechanisms? All of these sorts of things are a little different in each provision. So I wouldn't want to steer you in the wrong spot, but it is very, very technical.
Yeah, and especially for hydro, since we were sort of like forgotten and then out and then in and out, we're in now. So I think I will start with Shannon kind of bounced off of an important point. You are about to see a flood of news articles incorrectly saying that the clean energy tax credits die on July 4th. The wind and solar tax credits largely die on July 4th. We're fine. Nuclear's fine. Geothermal's fine. Weird side of the line for us, I know. And I won't harp on it now, but I think everyone on this call except possibly Shannon is an NHA member. So if you log into the portal, sort of the member side of the website, I can help you get there if you want. On the on-demand topics, the resources, one of the push buttons is tax credits and direct pay. So everything we publish lives there. We are still working on some more, powerhouse type articles, fact sheets, etc. Because the way these tax credits were birthed so funny, we kind of dropped in with a treadmill up to 11. So we're sort of backfilling some of the basic information. Oh, even better, Kelly. So hope members here can get into it. If you can't get into it, talk to Kelly. I'm sure we can find a way to share some of these members' resources with you on this tax credit information. I will say I don't even do my own taxes, so I would recommend hiring a consultant. On the other hand, as Matt highlighted, these tax credits are so valuable, they can cover hiring a good consultant. Which Kelly will share that list as we put it together.
I did want to mention this too. We have not claimed credits for any future work. We have only claimed claim credits for units that are complete and they're actually back online. So I know there are other utilities looking at things coming up in the future, but we have not gone there yet.
Any other questions from folks? All right, well, hearing none, we can wrap it up. So thanks everyone for the great discussion, and we appreciate the questions. Big thanks to Shannon and Matthew for sharing your time and expertise with the Flow community. As always, if you have any ideas for future Flow topics, we'd love to hear them. Please follow that link that Kelly dropped in the chat and add them there. Thanks again for joining, and we will see you in July. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys. Bye.